What's up, my wizards? It's Dev from Mtg. We like magic, you know by now. And right now, we are smack dab in the middle of Pro Tour Hour of Devastation as I record this. And a lot of people are focused on that, and we will get to it. You know, Sunday night, Monday morning, I'll bring you the top 8 from that event. We'll cover those decks, we'll talk about it, and then after that, I got some pure budget stuff I want to show you. Then we got to get rolling with rotation-proof decks, so I figured this weekend would actually be a good time to show you a really fun deck that I've been working on for a while, and you guys apparently wanted to see a lot. Jund Desert Frog. Before I really jump into it here, just let me remind you, this video is brought to you in part by TCGplayer.com. They're awesome, and they have a lot of cards for super cheap, as a matter of fact. If you're interested in this deck list, which this is a pretty intricate deck list when you include the Manabase, so you'll probably want to take a look at it all written out at one time. Just click the first link in the description. That'll take you straight over to TCG Player. You can view the deck, you can buy the deck for relatively cheap. Helps the channel out, helps them out, and helps you out too, so go ahead and do that. Full disclosure though, before we get started, I'm super hyped about this deck. Just so you know, man. Anytime I get to build with the frog, I'm really happy about it, and this is no exception. This deck is hella fun. So, if I'm going to show you this deck at all, I got to start with 2 cards, and those are Ramunap, Excavator, and the Gitrog monster. Well, first of all, the obvious interaction between these 2 cards works such that you'll sacrifice lands to Gitrog Monster, yeah, but you can just play them right out of your graveyard with Ramunap Excavator. You'll never be down on lands, and some turns you can play 2 lands out of your graveyard, which is pretty dirty. That leads to some super fun interactions out of the Manabase with stuff like Dunes of the Dead is a good example, make a 2/2 every turn. Sunscorched Desert, deal some damage every turn. Ramunap Ruins, deal some damage every turn, you know. Hashep Oasis, get a giant growth every turn. Like, there's some really, really neat stuff that we can do if we have these 2 guys out and we can just loop lands. But they also work independently of one another. You know, it doesn't look like Ramunap Excavator does that much in this deck without Gitrog out, but even without a Gitrog in play, we've got like 5 lands that cycle, we've got 6 lands that require us to sack lands, we've got creatures that require us to sack lands, and 4 of our lands can die in combat. And we've got a card that we can just like dump lands in the graveyard with too. So even if you don't have a Gitrog out, Excavator's still doing a bunch of work for you. As far as Hypnotoad goes, he's just like a huge, hard-to-kill dude. It's tough to make him croak, lol frog jokes. But seriously, though, like, a lot of the removal in the format doesn't touch this guy. You can't Fatal Push him, you can't Grasp of Darkness him, can't hit him with a Braid. Harness Lightning has to work really hard to kill him. He's a point of toughness above Hour of Devastation. That's really relevant. And he can beat a Torrential Gearhulk in combat. Like, what else do you want from him? But he does have a text box, you know. He's got relatively meaningless Death Touch, but that's not the main attraction, you know. The whole idea of sacking lands and then being able to play extra lands is the whole reason we're building the deck in the first place, at least the way we're building it. And he's card advantage. And again, you don't have to just be like, you know, sacrificing lands to him to get card advantage. Again, we've got a bunch of lands that cycle. We've got a bunch of ways of dumping lands into the graveyard. A bunch of our lands make us sack lands. So there are a ton of ways to draw cards off of Kermit in this deck. But on to the rest of the deck here. Let's start with the 2 copies of Mina and Den, Wildborn. This is more or less just a redundant effect. It's like playing more copies of the Gitrog monster. I don't want to play all the copies of Gitrog because he's a 5-drop and we're also playing a playset of another 5-drop. So we just don't have all the room for 5-drops. This curves a little bit better, and I like that about it, you know. So I'm not going to play, you know, 4 Gitrogs or 3 Gitrogs. We'll basically split a playset of legends that allow us to play extra lands. But there's some other reasons to play Mina and Den in the deck other than just redundancy, you know. First of all, 4 mana 4/4, fine body a lot of the time. It's got abilities, and those abilities are really relevant. You know, we can play extra lands. We can give creatures trample. That's really important with, like, Hashep Oasis, you know, giant grows something, and send it through a trample. That's always cool. And the tech here is Sunscorched Desert. Just keep, like, returning Sunscorched Desert to your hand, playing it again. You can do that twice a turn. That's pretty cool. So, and, by the way, if you have a Mina and Den and a Gitrog monster, you can officially play 3 lands a turn. That can be pretty nasty, too. Now, we're playing some 7-drops in this deck, you know. We're playing a bunch of lands, and we can play more than 1 a turn a lot of the time, so we're ramping. We've got some other ramp elements in the deck. We'll get to those in a second, but long story short, if all goes well, the way we want it to at least, we'll get to 7 lands fairly easily, and I want to be able to utilize those lands as much as we can, so we'll start doing that with 3 copies of World Breaker in the deck. Still a really good card. First of all, this exiles problem artifacts. There's a lot of those, including Gearhulks, by the way. Don't forget that you can get a Gear Hulk with this. That's pretty important. You can get a Catcher's Monument if you want. You can get a Heart of Kieran sometimes. There's a lot of stuff in Mardu vehicles, which is still an important deck that you can pick off with this. So that's pretty cool. Main deck enchantment and artifact hate. As far as enchantments go, though, you can pick off like Cast Out and other occasional things that you might see, you know, whether it's Frank Sanity or New Perspectives at your F&M. So that might be important. And it can pick off problem lands, like their only source of X color, you know? Or maybe they've got Ramunap Ruins and they just keep stacking deserts to it or something. Just get rid of that stupid thing. So like all the stuff that we exile with Warbreaker is is really important stuff. You know, the fact that it can't hit creatures or planeswalkers, I'm not too worried about. It still hits 3 really relevant permanent types. Not to mention that like Control hates it because it just keeps coming back and it's hard to remove in the first place. If they do let it resolve, you know, you've got a 5/7 out, but even if they don't let it resolve, you can break something that they have on the battlefield. That's cool. It's a cast trigger, you know? And it allows us to sacrifice lands that we can then just play right back out of our graveyard with Ramunap Excavator, and it sacks lands, so we'll be able to draw cards off a Gitrog monster. There's just so much synergy in this card. It's a good card already, and, by the way, it allows us to cast Kozilek's Return out of our graveyard, too, when we get it in play. So, like, just like all the stuff that Worldbreaker does, we've got to play it. It's actually one of the most important creatures in the deck, and is kind of our end game a lot of the time. But I've actually saved room for another 7-drop here, so we're playing 4 7-drops, if you can believe that. But I've saved room, I hope you don't mind, for 1 copy of Omnath Locus of Rage. This is like the 3rd or 4th example I've shown you so far of a card that rotates in like 2.5 months that's really, really cheap, and you don't have too much longer to play with, and it's really cool. Everybody loves Omnath. Like, Omnath is such a sweet card, you know? Same thing with, like, Gitrog Monster, Worldbreaker. Like, these are fun cards that have, like, a fan base. And you don't have long to play with them, so this is your last chance. I suggest you do it, especially considering that Omnath is like a buck. That's a buck for a guy that you'll play in Commander for, like, ever. And Omnath does some super sweet stuff in this deck. I don't have to tell you that, you know. We've got Mina and Den and Gitrog to let us play extra lands every turn. We've got Ramunap Excavator, so even if we don't have a land in our hand, we just play one out of our graveyard. That guarantees us a land or multiple lands every turn sometimes, and that translates into multiple huge guys on some turns, and pretty much a guaranteed 5/5, like literally every turn. What is not to like about that? That's just like absolutely ridiculous. 1 Omnath can take over the game, and we've got something we can tutor him up with in the late game, so 1 is fine, you know? I just wanted to squeeze an Omnath in there because he's a super fun, super sweet card that we don't have a whole lot of time left to play, and he's obviously tailor-made for a deck like this that just plays lands all day. I'm actually going to go back a spot on the curve here and show you the 2 copies of Shefet Monitor in the deck. I don't think that this deserves to be a 4 of, but I don't think it deserves to be a 0 of either. And honestly, this is one of the things that I end up siding out the most often, especially against aggro decks, but just look at all the stuff that the card does do in the deck, you know. First of all, for 4 mana, you draw a card, and you go search up a specific desert. We've got a toolbox strategy as far as our lands go. We've got a lot of one-ofs of specific lands. So being able to basic land cycle whatever source you need, or just desert cycle a specific desert, put it out into play, is extremely powerful. And this makes sure that even if we don't have another land in our hand on turn 4, that we can get to the 5 mana we need to play Gitrog or the next thing I'm going to show you, because it also costs 5 mana. So we've got to get to 5 mana at least in this deck, and Shefet Monitor helps us get there. You can also go get, like, you know, certain colors that we need at any given time, and when all else fails, it's a huge creature too. You know, you can, like, giant growth it with a Hashep Oasis and like send it in with Trample because Mina and Den, you know, it's suddenly got 9 power. Like, that's not bad as just like a creature in the very late game. If you top deck it or something, card isn't terrible. Give it a chance. I mean, it's a 6 power guy. But let's move to the spells so that I can show you that next thing I want to show you, and that is the 4 of Hour of Promise in the deck. This card is very good. Now, we're playing 13 deserts in this deck, so it's very, very likely that you'll be able to get a desert by turn 5 when you cast this. Go search up 2 more deserts, and then bing, bang, you've got a couple of tokens. And those tokens are actually really relevant, whether they give you a little bit of offense. You know, we're not playing a whole bunch of creatures. We're playing like 14 creatures and some creature lands. So, not playing a whole bunch of creatures, Our Promise essentially allows us to play 4 or really 8 more creatures in our deck. That's really important, whether we're on offense, you know, or we're on defense. We want to block a couple of dudes, chump block for a turn or 2. Maybe we can like double block a relatively big guy and trade with it. That's just really great against like some of the aggro variants. If we can get those 2 tokens, it can really save our bacon, man. They can like trade in combat with a couple of guys, keep them off our back for a couple of turns. Just the tokens are way more important than you might think they are, and we get them a lot. And like if you go Chef at Monitor on turn 4, go get a desert, and then turn 5 play Hour of Promise, well, you're also in that circumstance guaranteed to get your tokens. So don't underestimate the tokens is all I'm saying. But this is another thing that allows us to play a toolbox strategy when it comes to our mana base. We've got a lot of 1 and 2 of stuff in our mana base, and this allows us to go search up whatever we want at any given time. Being able to tutor any land is really important. And, by the way, if we can get to 5 mana and we have an Hour of Promise, that means that we can automatically get to 7 mana, which is important when we got 4 dudes that cost 7 mana. So, if we can get to an Hour of Promise, we can get to an Omnath, and that's super important. And I know that like Green-Red Ramp looks like the only deck that really wants this right now, but trust me, give it a shot in this, you'll like it. And, by the way, extra interaction, Omnath. If you get 2 lands out with an Hour of Promise, well then boom, 10 power suddenly on the board. So there's that too. Just Hour of Promise is good. I promise you'll like it. Easiest joke ever. I'm sorry about that, guys. I'm sorry. We're also going to play 4 copies of Traverse the Ulvenwald in the deck. This is yet another thing that can go fetch up lands for us, but doesn't put them straight onto the battlefield, but that's fine. Turn 1, turn 2, we can go get a source of mana that we might need. All of that's really important in the early game, and it thins our deck a little, so that's cool. But after we do get the Delirium on it, then we can go search up that Omnath. We can go search up a Gitrog monster if we don't have one already, a World Breaker if we need it, whatever. Just tutor up any creature in the entire deck for 1 mana. And with all the pseudo ramp that we're working with and with all the lands that we're playing, you'll see, we will be able to play this and then play the thing we tutor up an awful lot of the time. So Traverse the Ulvenwald just does whatever we needed to at any stage of the game. And by the way, after you have Delirium, you can go get a land if you want it, any land in your whole deck, which can sometimes be really relevant. And by the way, not super hard to get Delirium in this deck. We've got like 9 sorceries, 9 instants, 14 creatures, 25 lands, and like some enchantments even too. So not tough to get Delirium in this deck by the mid to late game. Weird pick here. We're going to play 3 copies of Vessel of Nascency in the deck, but looks strange, but it does an awful lot. We can drop this as early as turn 1, some games, and then a little bit later on we can pop it, get something important, whether it's a land or a creature, and then dump some lands in our graveyard. We don't care if we dump them in our graveyard, because obviously we can just play them again once we get our Excavator in play. That's pretty awesome, And it allows us to like dump a World Breaker in the graveyard and get it back later if we want to. Just a lot of cool stuff that we can do with this. We're going to want deserts in our graveyard occasionally, and we're going to want lands in our graveyard period so we can get some value out of Excavators. So Vessel of Nascency does all of that and gives us card advantage, and looks like digs pretty deep into the deck and is an enchantment for Delirium. There's just like a lot of little reasons for this card to be in the deck. Now, the rest of the entire deck is removal at this point. We're playing 4 different removal pieces because we really want to be able to control the early game. If you haven't noticed, most of the stuff that I've shown you is stuff you can't play until turns, 4, 5, 6, So we've got a lot of top end in this deck. Let's look at our low end here because we really want to be able to not die to aggro decks. So let's see how we're doing that. We're going to play 2 copies of Magma Spray, 3 copies of Abrade, 1 copy of Cut to Ribbons, and 4 copies of Kozilek's Return. Well, Magma Spray is just the quickest, easiest removal spell in the format that makes sure they can't bring back like Earthshaker Kenras or Dread Wanderers or Scrap Heap Scroungers or any of that stuff. So it can be a really important thing to where we can use our mana really effectively in the early game and just keep stuff from breathing down our necks. Magma Spray is a very important card to play in this particular format, so we'll play it. We're going to play the 3 copies of Abrade to similarly keep smaller guys off our back in the early game, but this can even kill a Torrential Gearhulk, and sometimes it'll kill a monument when you need it to. Just Abrade is really versatile and only costs 2 mana. Let's play it. Now, Cut to Ribbons is another just cheap removal spell that kills relatively big guys. This is like a copy of Grasp of Darkness that we only have to pay 1 colored mana for. So that's really important. Sure, it doesn't kill gods, but whatever. Still a really cheap piece of removal that'll take out small to middling guys. We want that. Even if it didn't have the Ribbons half on it, we'd still be okay with playing it. But Ribbons is important in this deck because we've got a lot of mana. Between Hour of Promise, Chef at Monitor, Ramunap Excavator playing lands out of our graveyard, Mina and Denn, Gitrog Monster letting us play extra lands every turn. We've got a lot of lands, so sometimes Ribbons can just finish the game. It's ridiculous reach. X can equal 8 or 9 sometimes in the late game really easily, so you can just come out of nowhere and just take their head off with the Ribbons. But Kozilek's Return is probably the most important of these removal spells in this format. For just 3 mana, and only one of it is a colored mana. We only need 1 red mana to play this spell. That's really important. This can just cut the legs out from under aggro decks, especially mono red aggro, which looks like the deck to beat. From what I can tell, obviously the Pro Tour is not over, but if mono red aggro does well at all, then you're going to see a lot of it at F&M because it's not that expensive to build, and it's a really effective deck. So look for that at a shop near you. We've got to be able to beat that deck. And Kozilek's Return is a great way to turn 3, destroy their entire board really easily, and if we play a World Breaker, we can wipe the board again. It would be a hard task to overstate how good Kozilek's Return is in this deck and in this format. We absolutely need it not to get run over by the majority of aggro strategies right now. I know it looks weird to play the whole 4 of, but that's my advice. I really don't want to get stomped down by super fast aggro, and playing Kozilek's Return is one of the best ways to not have that happen. But here's the ridiculous mana base right here that we finally come to after a lot of change here. We've got 2 of the Cycling Deserts. That's important. We've got 4 Ramunap Ruins, 2 Hashep Oasis, and 1 Ifnir Deadlands, all the Painland deserts that don't come into play tap. That's really important. And Ramunap Ruins is really good, like super good, provides a lot of reach for us. We can keep sacrificing deserts to it over and over in this deck, and we can just grind the game out that way sometimes. Hashep Oasis is a giant growth every turn some of the times. Ifnir Deadlands is removal every turn. Really grindy removal sometimes, but it is removal every turn. All that is really, really important. Hostile Desert and Hissing Quagmire are in there as our creature lands. We need a few of those. I don't want to go all out on Hostile Desert because it doesn't produce colored mana, and we're playing 3 colors. We got to play all the colored mana we can, but Hostile Desert is also really good. We're putting our lands into the graveyard really easily in this deck, so we can swing with Hostile Desert most turns that we want to, or it would be profitable. Sunscorched Desert is in there, and Dunes of the Dead, to just be cute. But there's a couple of tricks in this deck that allow you to get a 2/2 every turn, or to deal a damage or 2 every turn with Sunscorched Desert. Just another way to grind the game out if you need to. That can be important. We've got 3 of the Bicycle lands, 2 Sheltered Thicket and 1 Canyon Slough. Another way to easily put lands into our graveyard, a way to protect against flood, a way to draw cards. All that's important. And obviously, if you cycle any of these, the Bicycle lands or the Cycling Deserts, while you have a Gitrog out, you draw 2 cards, which can be super important too. And here's your sideboard right here, most of which is geared towards aggro, like 10 slots. I think it's actually 9 slots in the sideboard are geared against aggro. We've got Magma Spray, we've got Blazing Volley, not only for mono red aggro, but also for Kettra's Monuments decks. Blazing Volley is very important out of the board right now. I am that committed to it, yes. We're going to play the Abrade, mostly against other Torrential Gearhulks and the Kettra's Monument decks, but also against aggro in general. We might want another removal piece. We're also going to play 4 Sand Stranglers, which is good, actually. Sand Strangler was in the main deck for a while, but relegated it to the sideboard once I decided that we wanted to do something a little bit more go big with our overall game plan. At first, it was Sand Strangler and Ramunap Hydra, but Hydra got cut relatively early and Sand Strangler got sent to the sideboard. But don't let it make you think that's a bad card. The card is actually pretty good and is essentially a 2-for-1 against most aggro strategies. On the other end of things, against like control and mid-range and such longer games, we've got Dragon Master Outcast, a very good card. Just so you know. Tireless Tracker draws us all of the cards in the world over the course of a long game, and Dissenter's Deliverance is essentially a 5th thing that allows us to kill artifacts. And this one we can very, very easily get the color for. It's not super hard to get red for a Braid, but it is just easier to get green for Dissenter's Deliverance. So there's that to think of too. And here are your power rankings for the deck. A final score of 65. That's not bad, right in the middle of the road as far as competitive decks go. And the deck does take an extra step or 2 to get started up. You see that speed of 3 there? I mean it. The deck does need a little breathing room. The beginning of the game should be all you playing removal, then getting set up in the mid-game, and then by turn 5 or 6, usually turn 6, you're playing a 7-power guy, after an hour of Promise or something like that. So the deck takes a little while to get rolling, but if you go like Ramunap Excavator turn 3 or 4, the Gitrog Monster turn 5, you're set up right there, and literally every play that you make for the rest of the game is going to be game-breaking, whether it's Omnath, World Breaker, Hour of Promise, even like just playing a Chefette Monitor. That's a huge dude, when you've got so much value in your mana base, whether you're just like killing them slowly with Ramunap Ruins or Sunscorched Desert, or you're just like giant growthing a dude or 2 sometimes every single turn with Hashep Oasis. I keep bringing that up because doing that is really, really awesome. Like you can make Ramunap Excavator a 5/6 with a hash up Oasis. It's really important, you know? And all of our other creatures get absolutely out of control with hash up Oasis. You can slowly kill all their dudes with If Near Dead lands over the course of a few turns, you know? Just, the lands do an awful lot of work and provide all of the reach in the deck, too. So just like, a lot of stuff going on in this deck, a lot of synergy that does take a while to start snowballing, but once the ball gets huge, there's really no way they can get out of the way of it. And I could seriously be here all night discussing all the little interactions in this deck, you know, like, just go back and watch again, man. Like, every single card that I talk about in this deck interacts with 2 or 3 other cards, so the synergy is off the charts. If the deck can get some time to get set up, then it's going to run over the opponent, given a few turns. So try this thing out, you know. It's very, very, very fun deck, because once it gets its pieces in place, it's just more or less over. You know, it takes some work to get there, but once you get there, you'll have all the fun, all of the fun in the world. And the deck's really not that expensive, considering it's 3 colors and it plays like a bunch of rares and some mythics and stuff, you know. The deck is just over $100 on TCG Player, only about $110 to be exact. That's really not that much, especially considering this is Pro Tour weekend, and like decks that were $100 are going to shoot up to like $250. Not guaranteed, not guaranteed. Don't start burning stuff down. But cards do usually spike for important decks after Pro Tour weekend. So this is still a relatively cheap deck that I don't see a whole lot of cards from taking a huge price spike. So let me know how you felt about this deck, and make sure to click that first link in the description if you're interested in this deck list. And you're going to probably want to look at that land base again, because there's a lot of stuff going on in that mana base. So click the link, and what are we doing next time? That's important. Well, next time, a couple of important monocolored decks. I'm going to give you another shot at Mono Green Stompy. A lot of you were disappointed that we didn't do it the other day. So if you want to see Mono Green Stompy, I'm going to give you another shot at that deck right there. And if you want to, the other deck we're looking at is a deck that's rising up the ranks. It's not super important yet, but it's got a lot of promise, and that is Mono Black Midrange. Mono Black Midrange. A lot of people actually have some faith in it. So, which one do you want to see? Mono Green Stompy, Mono Black Midrange. Battle of the Mono decks. It's always fun. But after you vote on that in the comments section, what I want you to do is like the video if you enjoyed the video. Actually, tell you what, whether or not you enjoyed the video, click the like button. That would be really awesome. You can also follow us on Twitter at SBMTGDev. You can support us on Patreon if you're super cool, at patreon.com/SBMTG. And if you just want to help the channel out a little bit, you can just, again, click the link in the description. That actually helps me out and helps you out. So why would you not do it? So do all the YouTube stuff, and I'll see you guys later. I'm Dev from SBMTG. Thanks for watching, my wizards.